I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing.
Antifa!
Okay, that was a metaphor for the way that we are censored on the left. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are thrilled to be here with you guys. We have a really wonderful show for you tonight. We have two guests. We have Kshama Sawant talking about her exciting campaign, and we have Tara Al-Alami talking about a really important and disturbing report that she and the Palestinian Feminist Collective just worked on, which basically documents Israel's use of rape and sexualized violence. So both very important things to be talking about. And before we get started, just some reminders. Thanks again for joining. We do usually stream Tuesdays at 7 p.m. as well as Fridays at 12 noon. But I was blessed and fortunate enough to go to a screening of a great documentary called American Doctor about 3 doctors who go to Gaza. We've had all 3 of those doctors on the Katie Halper Show, Thayer Ahmed, Feroz Sidwa, and Dr. Mark Perlmutter. So that was great. We will have them back on. We'll have the filmmaker on. Really amazing documentary. Please do hit the like. Please do subscribe if you haven't already by pressing subscribe and then the bell. Please do become Patreon supporters or YouTube members. And to do that, you go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show, or you become YouTube members by hitting subscribe and then join. And and this Friday, we're going to be having on very special guests to talk about the violence in the West Bank, including Kamel, the father of Saif, who we've covered before, who was murdered in the West Bank, along with Ro Khanna. So that will be 12 noon on Friday. Sorry, I'm sitting on one of these chairs that's good for your back that I'm kneeling on, but that makes it a little bit unstable. Okay, but this interview is not going to be stable either, because it's going to be destabilizing the status quo. The interview will be stable, but the content of it will be disruptive, because we are so excited to be bringing back onto the show Kshama Sawant, who was elected to the Seattle City Council in 2013 as the first socialist in nearly a century. She won 4 elections during a decade in office, overcoming bitter opposition from big business and the Democratic Party. Her office won the nation's highest minimum wage, which is now $21.30 per hour, the Amazon tax, and landmark renter rights. In the wake of the jobs ruling that dismantled Roe v. Wade, Kshama won publicly funded free abortion in Seattle. She also won the nation's second and strongest resolution against the genocide in Gaza in November 2023. And now she is running for Congress as an independent anti-war socialist and calling for a total arms embargo on Israel and for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich. So I just gave away a lot of what she's going to be talking about, but I wanted to make sure that people got all of that in the introduction. So welcome back to the show, Kshama.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming on. Talk about what made you run.
You mean for Congress or?
Yes, this time. Sorry, yeah, for Congress, yeah.
Yes, I mean we are in dire straits as far as the lives of tens of millions of working class families in America are concerned, and we are in dire straits internationally, especially if you look at the genocide in Gaza and the incredibly brutal wars that are going on in the entire region, with Lebanese, Yemeni, Irani, Iraqi people being slaughtered. And back home here in the United States, we are seeing an unprecedented cost of living crisis. And we're also seeing at the same time that we have this dismal situation that never before in our lifetimes have more numbers of American working people sent a clear signal that they are so fed up with the status quo. They want a fight back. In fact, Increasingly, polls are showing that people are fed up with the Democratic and Republican parties just as much as they are fed up with Donald Trump. And also, people are understanding that the Democratic Party hasn't actually fought against Trump. And a lot of the agenda that the majority of working people disagree with is a bipartisan agenda for those two parties. And so, what we need most desperately is a real shakeup in Congress. We don't need more team players for team genocide and team billionaires. We need a shakeup. We need a disruptor. That is how I used my city council office in Seattle for 10 years, and we won the incredibly historic victories that you mentioned. And that's why we are now running for Congress.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you for that. And tell us more about what your platform consists of.
Yes, as you mentioned already, we're fighting for an end to all military aid to Israel and for a full permanent arms embargo on Israel. And obviously, that means really building movements against the brutal occupation, against the absolutely horrendous conditions that the Palestinians are being subjected to in the entire region. And we're also fighting for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich. We're saying that in a very deliberate way, Katie, because we want free healthcare. We don't want some healthcare in name and then the insurance and the pharma companies and the private hospitals continuing to suck the blood out of the working class. We want free healthcare of every kind, including dental, vision, and so on. And we want it to be funded by taxing the rich. We're also fighting to shut down ICE and the detention centers and to stop the deportation, stop the militarization of the border. And we're fighting for full citizenship for all immigrant community members. We're also fighting to shut down the data centers and stop the data centers and stop the mass layoffs as well. And that's why we are also fighting for a public sector living wage jobs guarantee. And we're also, by the way, fighting for a $25 an hour national minimum wage and for national rent control.
Wow, that's great. Now, Kshama, you are not a member of DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. You've criticized DSA and DSA candidates. And before we get into that, I want to know what you think the difference is between democratic socialism and socialism, or the socialism that you embrace.
I am a member of DSA, by the way. I'm a dues-paying member of DSA and have been for several years. And the fundamental difference is that I'm a revolutionary socialist, meaning I don't believe that we can actually attain the kind of society we want to attain on the basis of capitalism, that it has to be overthrown and replaced with a socialist world. And the bare minimum aspect of that would be to take the big corporations into democratic public ownership by workers and use them in order to benefit society. Obviously, this is most urgently seen in the need to avert the total climate catastrophe. Climate crisis is one of the most urgent crises that is facing humanity. There's lots of people in DSA who subscribe to different types of ideas, but I would say overall, as far as if you look at the DSA, the national page where what they stand for, I think what they are talking about is a capitalist system that is much more social democratic, like in some of the countries in Western Europe. Now, to be clear, I want all of that. I'm fighting for all of that. I just don't think, one, that is enough, but also, and most immediately importantly, I don't think you can win those kinds of gains without the kind of strategy that I am putting forward, which is what I call a class struggle-based fighting strategy. That is the strategy that we used in Seattle through my city council office. That is the reason we were able to win those victories. And I would say that that's a difference in strategy that we have with some of the people.
And so what is the difference between your strategy and the strategy that DSA employs?
So one of the things is running in the Democratic Party. And for us, running in the Democratic Party is not, in my mind, that is not the starting question. In my mind, the starting question is, what is the strategy through which we can win the biggest possible victories for the working class? Even if you set aside the question of capitalism itself, we all, I think, agree that we need to win things for the working class that will improve their lives, because right now so many people are in just utter misery. I mean, this is the richest country in the history of humanity, and half of American households are reporting that they can't even afford groceries. So I think we have a lot of broad agreement that we need to win things like free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, like we're putting forward, like a national $25 an hour minimum wage, all of that. So the question is, what is the strategy to win these kinds of victories? And I would say it's no coincidence that it was through my revolutionary city council office that we were able to win the nation's highest minimum wage in Seattle, defeat Jeff Bezos and win the Amazon tax and renter rights that don't exist in most cities in the nation. It's not a coincidence, because our understanding of the nature of capitalism also means that we have a certain kind of strategy, meaning we recognize that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the institutions of capitalism, and that we have to fight against them in order to be able to fight against the billionaire class. I mean, they're not the billionaires, of course, but they're representatives. They're political spokespeople of the billionaires, and you can only win against the billionaire class, against the capitalist class, if you fight against their political spokespeople as well. And so the question is, do we agree that we need the kind of strategy that I'm talking about, a fighting strategy where you expose the politicians who are betraying the working class and you build mass movements in order to win victories? And if we agree, I'm not assuming that everybody agrees, but I'm just saying, for the sake of argument, if we agree with that, then it leads to the corollary question of, can you carry out that strategy inside the Democratic Party? And the answer that the Democratic Party itself has shown is emphatically a no. I mean, look at what happened in 2016. Bernie Sanders had a campaign that was electrifying the working class. He called for a political revolution against the billionaire class. I supported his campaign. I spoke at his rallies, and we campaigned for him. We literally canvassed for him. But at the same time, we were also honest and said that the Democratic Party will never allow this agenda to be carried out in their party, and that they would throw him out, as a nominee. They would not appoint him as a nominee, and they would find some way or another to do that. And they did. Both times in 2016 and 2020, they found a way to remove him. And so that really proves our point, in my view, that the Democratic Party is not a vehicle for carrying out the kind of fight back that's needed. And so it's not a coincidence that we, with one socialist office, we were able to win the kinds of victories that, unfortunately, DSA electeds, even with their many, 300 or so offices, haven't been able to win.
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to focus on these kind of nerdy or wonky distinctions, but you are a member of DSA and you're also a member of another party, correct?
I'm a member of Revolutionary Workers, and we also, more broadly, we founded Workers Strike Back, which is very important because Workers Strike Back has a political program. Anybody can go and check our website. We voted, our members voted, we had a democratic discussion and vote on the program of Workers Strike Back. And Workers Strike Back doesn't demand that you agree with us on revolutionary socialism, but what we do fight, we fight for all the demands in my campaign. Many of them are reflected in Workers Strike Back, and Workers Strike Back is also fighting, this is part of our program, for a new party for the working class, because we don't believe that the Democratic Party is the way forward.
So I've heard you say critical things, many of which I agree with, on Zohran Mamdani. But how do you judge his certain moves of his, especially things that you yourself are fighting for, like the rent freeze? So how does that fit into your calculation? Is it that Zohran Mamdani's various victories are steps in the right direction, and you're excited to see them happening, even if you think maybe the overall strategy is not the way to go? How do you kind of reconcile these things?
Yeah, I don't think there's any contradiction in what we're saying, because our starting point is non-sectarianism. And I just want to define quickly what I mean by sectarianism is the idea that you would not fight for the working class or not prioritize the ideas of the working class because what's more important for you is your whatever internal differences, or on the left, or you want to build your own little organization, and you're going to stand in the way of what's in the interest of the working class. So we have it's a completely non-sectarian approach, meaning any victory for the working class is a victory that we celebrate. And so, yeah, absolutely, I support the rent freeze that was won in New York. And in fact, when the campaign was on, during the election year, and also since then, I have constantly said that I strongly support the demands that he was running on. In fact, I also talked about how it was correct for him and I agreed with it. This is how I run my campaign, that emphasizing the demands at all times. That is what Bernie Sanders was also doing. I mean, I have disagreements with Bernie Sanders, but that's the correct thing to do. You emphasize the demands. You don't run on personality or personal narrative. You talk about what you're fighting for, because that's what the working class shows up for, because they want to see how is their life going to change. And so I agreed with all of that. I also said, and I still say, and I said it to Russell Dobler just now, that if there's a movement to win $30 an hour minimum wage in New York, which was one of the demands on his platform, I will personally come to New York and help build the fight. So absolutely, we want all of that. But do I think that those are that the strategy is a step in the right direction? No, I don't agree. I mean, those reforms, do we want them? Of course, but I don't agree that we can actually change the society in the way that we want to, by having the strategy of trying to keep the peace with the Kathy Hochuls and the Hakeem Jeffries and all of that of this world. No, I don't agree with that. I have a very clear disagreement about that. I really disagreed with him endorsing Kathy Hochul, especially, I mean, she's an arch Zionist, so I don't think any socialist has any business endorsing Zionists. And he has also endorsed Hakeem Jeffries. Is absolutely just not acceptable. But on top of that, he endorsed Kathy Hochul in the middle of the nurses' strike in New York, at the same time that Hochul was delivering executive orders that made it easier for the hospital bosses to hire scabs to undermine the strike. That's no, you can't do that. But it raises a deeper question. It's not just about, it's not about, oh, what was your position on this or that, and are we going to judge them in isolation? No, it's a question of what does it actually indicate? It indicates a difference in strategy, and this is a fundamental difference. Is that in order to win something, we need to keep the peace with people like Kathy Hochul and Hakeem Jeffries. That's the idea. It's not just Mamdani. Right. This is the ideas of the DSA leadership that we disagree with, and it's an open disagreement. And I disagree with that because you can't actually win the kinds of victories. First of all, in the here and now, you can't actually win the kinds of victories that we have won in Seattle, that scale of victories, if you're trying to keep the peace. Because when you're trying to keep the peace, what the reforms that you are able to eke out are far smaller than what you are able to win if you build a movement that is in antagonism to the people in power, to the people like Kathy Hochul. So when people say, well, he has to be nice to her because, she controls the purse strings of the state, my response to that is, yeah, I mean, yes, technically she does, but these things are not etched in stone, in the sense that the power dynamic under capitalism, the balance of power, the question is always between the working class and the ruling class. And unless the working class builds mass movements, the power dynamic is always in the hands of the powerful people. So there is no option but to build mass movements. But when you do build mass movements, it completely changes the power dynamic away from the bosses and their political servants to the workers. I mean, when I was calling for $15 an hour minimum wage in my 2013 election, everybody in the Democratic Party, even the labor leaders, all of them called it utopian. They mocked me in our campaign, that it would never been won, because everybody was proceeding from the framework of, well, what can you get while keeping the peace, while leaders keeping the peace with the bosses and their representatives, while having cordial relations. And we didn't prioritize. I mean, I'm not looking to have any disagreement with anyone just for the sake of it, but we didn't prioritize me keeping cordial relations with these powerful people. We prioritized building mass movements. And it was the fact that the working class of Seattle absolutely embraced the $15 demand, which is why I won that election that year, that completely changed the dynamic. And in fact, the Seattle Times, which is no fan of mine, they were forced to admit that this momentum was set because of my election victory. And they said that I came, and when I say I, it means our movement came from nowhere to commandeer the city's political agenda, and that $15 an hour was happening at lightning speed. Now, all of that was, part of that strategy that won that was an understanding that you cannot prioritize cozy relations with powerful people. You will end up antagonizing them. Antagonizing them may not be the goal, but they will be antagonized because of the class differences. That there's a class line, there's a class divide. They represent the ruling class, we represent the working class. So in order to fight for the working class, we do have to carry out the kind of movement building that we need to do. I mean, one question is, there were 50,000 people or so that was claimed that campaigned for Mamdani last year. What needs to be done is those people need to be mobilized into fighting for big shifts in New York. And I'll just say one thing in the case of, as I said, I totally support the rent freeze, but we have to keep in mind there were 3 rent freezes under Bill de Blasio. And what really needs to be happening, in addition to the rent freeze, is also a fight for massive taxes on the rich, and also to build affordable housing, and to save the NYCHA housing, the public housing that is right now on the chopping block. Mamdani didn't start that, but he's also not stopping it. I would, if I were there, I would mobilize the thousands of people who campaigned for me into action in order to save that public housing, because it is yet another gift on a golden platter to the real estate industry, to the Wall Street interests. And we have to stop that. And we have to keep in mind that the vast majority of people in New York are not going to benefit from the rent freeze. So the rent freeze victory needs to be built on to win bigger victories. And the process of doing that will antagonize Kathy Hochul and others.
Right. One slight correction is that I think Zohran Mamdani did not endorse Hakeem Jeffries, but he did not get behind a potential challenge from Chiose, who some people wanted to challenge Jeffries.
No, that was earlier, but later on a news show, he said he endorsed Hakeem Jeffries.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay, cool. So you corrected me then. Okay, so I wanted to go on to talk about Adam Smith, and who you are challenging, the member of Congress. And also, let's take a look at his recent appearance on Breaking Points, where he was interviewed by Crystal Ball.
So, if you have a situation where Israel is threatened on all sides, and I know it's like, well, no, it's not saying they don't have a right to exist, just they have to let all the Palestinians back in, and then effectively the Jews no longer control Israel. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, but don't you as an idea of equal rights for all ethnicities, something that you, in theory, support as a Democrat?
Well, sure, but the practical result of this is, if you say there should be equal rights within Israel, but if Israel allows it, they cease to exist as a country.
No, they cease to exist as a Jewish ethno-state. That's very different from ceasing to exist as a country.
Oh, come on. Hold on. Stop.
Why is
No, we got to drill down.
An issue for U.S. taxpayers?
We got to drill down on that.
Okay. Just how to say, and then I'll let you comment. But the condescension, it's just dripping with condescension and interrupting, and we talking to her like she's a child. Okay.
Right. They cease to exist as an ethno-state. So basically, Jews would live in Palestine and be governed by the Palestinians, by the Arabs. Okay. And maybe that's just what has to happen in the minds of some people, but understand the consequences of it. Understand why Israel was created in the first place, so that the
imperialism.
Jews would have some place to go, okay?
Right,
and
but
as opposed to the West, which didn't want to let them in.
And to just blithely say, well, yeah, it'll go away and it'll be fine. So that's...
Well, I mean, shout out to Smith for unintentionally admitting it's an ethno-state. But what is your response to this?
First of all, just as you noted, Katie, just this guy, his perennial complaint is that the left doesn't engage in civil debate, civil discourse, people talking over each other. He always accuses anti-war activists of talking over people they don't agree with. And look at this interview. As you said, he was dripping with condescension, and he barely allowed her to finish a sentence each time. He just kept interrupting just continually. I mean, it was just horrible. I mean, kudos to Crystal Ball for asking him hard questions despite all that. And as far as his position is concerned, I mean, it is just untenable. I mean, as you said, Katie, already, the Israeli state as it exists right now, the apartheid ethnic cleansing state, is a creation of a project of capitalism, specifically American and British capitalism, And the state as it exists right now plays the role of a garrison state for capitalist interests, keeping a tamp down on working class rebellion in a region that is geopolitically and economically extremely crucial, with its location and also with all the oil reserves. And so it is the existence of this apartheid state, the continued existence of it in that region is very much tied to the powers of capitalism. And so we will need militant movements to address this, both in the region, which it has to include the working class of Egypt also, because that's the biggest section of the working class in the region, and it needs militant movements here as well. And what are we talking about? We are talking about a state, as I said, that is an apartheid state that is carrying out ethnic cleansing, and that all of that occupation is coming in such brutal forms. Obviously, the genocide looms large on us, but it's long before the genocide. It's also the brutal settlements. In fact, the settlements are escalating. The genocide is expanding to the West Bank. I mean, it is unbelievable. It's unimaginable. Literally, Palestinian people's land being stolen at gunpoint and their homes being bulldozed. All of this needs to stop. All of this needs to stop. In other words, the Israeli state as it exists, the Israeli state of apartheid and ethnic cleansing, that state needs to be smashed. That needs to happen. And for that to happen, like I said before, we will need almighty mass movements of the working class in the region-wide. It can't just be left to people in the Palestinian lands, because that will not be enough. We will need unity across the region of the working class. And we will need militant movements in the US, because the Israeli state exists at the behest of the billionaire class as a whole, but specifically the billionaire class in the United States. And that means it's also exists at the behest of the Democratic and Republican parties who represent the interests of the billionaires. And that is why today's NDAA vote, you saw Adam Smith vote against it, but this is his own bill. The only reason he voted against it because he's so nervous about our campaign. And the fact that he asked to go on breaking points also shows that he is extremely anxious about our campaign. So my appeal to all your viewers would be, if he is so nervous just in the primary election, imagine what impact we could have if we had the chance to advance to the November election. Obviously, we have to be one of the top 2 vote getters to go into the November election, but that is why we need the help to do that. But that's the impact we can have. This guy votes against his own bill. That's how nervous he is. But at the same time, we should point out that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party together figured out a way to get this bill to pass. So in other words, they're willing to have political theater of Adam Smith voting no on his own bill, but making sure that the bill is passing nonetheless. So the Zionist interests have not been affected in any way. In fact, the danger is the opposite. The danger is that people look at Adam Smith's vote and think, oh, he's having a change of heart. But he is not. In that same show with Crystal Ball, he said, I don't have any regrets. Literally, when she asked him about the genocide and everything, he said, I don't have any regrets. On top of that, we should note that just in the month of June, he has taken over $51,000 from NORPAC and AIPAC, which are both notoriously pro-genocide, pro-ethnic cleansing PACs. And so, no, there is no stopping point that he has reached, or some new revelations to him that, oh, it's been brutal. Absolutely not. He is a leading warmonger. He is the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. And he is only taking these performative votes in order to try and launder his blood-drenched reputation. And we can't allow him to do that.
Right. So tell people more about this NDAA, his bill, and it actually was just voted on today. So tell people more about it. We talked about it a little bit too with Dennis Kucinich.
Yes, as you said, this was voted on just a few hours ago. This is the bill that is going to allocate $1 trillion new dollars for war spending, enormously escalate funding for weaponry for Israel, and also fuse the US and Israeli militaries. I mean, this bill is as dystopian as they come, and it's been authored by Adam Smith, my opponent, and by Mike Rogers, the Republican chair of the House Armed Services Committee. So in other words, these wars that are happening right now and the funding of the genocide, yes, Trump is leading that, but they are absolutely bipartisan wars. It is bipartisan. These bills are literally being co-authored by Republicans and Democrats together. And so this is a bill that not only has this whopping number of $1.15 trillion for war spending, but the fusing of the US and Israeli military, it's also an extremely just frightening proposition. And one of the reasons they are trying to do that is precisely because there is a change in consciousness in the American society for the first time in the nearly 80 years of Israel's existence. For the first time, they are they, meaning the Republicans and Democrats and the Zionist lobby that funds them both, they are not able to convince the majority of the American working class that all of this money going to the war profiteers and all of the bloodshed and slaughter in the Middle East, that is somehow good for their lives, meaning the American people's lives. That is no longer passing muster. And so there is huge anger. We saw seemingly invincible incumbents being defeated in the New York City and the Colorado Democratic primaries. And a big part of that was anger against the spending for Israel, war spending for Israel. And so what they are trying to do, what the Democrats and Republicans are trying to do, is to find a way to bypass the votes altogether, so that no politician has to actually say, yes, I voted for genocide or I voted for Israel funding. Just bypass it altogether. That is what's so dystopian and frightening about the fusing of the US and Israeli militaries. But I would say that, that alongside the $1 trillion, all of this makes this bill an absolutely horrific bill. And this bill was introduced just last month. So Adam Smith has not had any change of heart. He's just looking at the primary election that's coming up. He's looking at the momentum that our campaign is having, which it really does have a lot of momentum on the ground. We've been endorsed by the Stranger newspaper, which is objectively the most significant endorsement in this area, in the Seattle area. And he's getting really nervous. And which is not to say that we can get complacent. I just wanted to share with your viewers, we have an uphill task, because this is, as I said, we have to get one of the top 2 highest votes. And we're not only running against Adam Smith, there's a Republican in the race who has openly declared that he's running against me. He's running to take votes away from me. He's not running against Adam Smith. And there's also another Democrat in the race who's effectively doing that, taking votes away from our campaign. So we have an uphill task, but we have a real shot to get into the November election. And we hope that, everybody will help us do that.
Right. Well, it is pretty incredible, by the way, that he changed his vote after a month, right? Like, what possibly changed? Like, what could have changed? Was Netanyahu? Because he claims that it was about Netanyahu, right? Like, people like Ben Gurion and Smotrich, that's what made him change his mind on the merging of the Israeli and American militaries. And of course, he said that's not what the bill does, but that is what it does. But what on earth could have happened? I mean, obviously, this was strategic, not a moral call, right? Nor was it an evidence-based call, because it's not like Israel changed its genocide over the past month.
Yeah, I'll tell you what changed in that 1 month. And you're right. Even when the House Armed Services Committee held its vote, he was absolutely cheerleading it, every step of the way, his own bill, and he was really proud of it. He released press releases and all of that. You know what changed is we got the Stranger endorsement.
Oh, right.
And that is when it really, I mean, our campaign's demands and our track record, all of that has been extremely popular with all the working people we talked to. But it was true that because of the corporate media invisibilizing us, you could have imagined that our campaign, would not succeed. And like I said, even right now, we can't give any guarantees. We have to fight for every vote right now. We have to be very sober about that. But the point is, undeniably, that after the Stranger endorsement, everything changed. There was a real dynamic around our campaign. It's like there's an incredible momentum about this campaign, and that is what is now making him very nervous, and that is why he also reached out to Breaking Points. But I don't think the interview went the way he wanted it to go.
Yeah, so it really does speak to the power of political pressure, right? And the power of having someone else shift the discourse. Now, we've talked about this a few times recently. It's a mixed blessing, right? We have to be vigilant about this because it's, of course, a great sign of progress that AIPAC and support of Israel is being seen increasingly as politically toxic, and that's great. But what that means now, and this is new, is that people will performatively move away, like Adam Smith, right, from his own bill. Without actually embracing it on a fundamental level, right? So he kind of does performatively. So what are your thoughts on this? Like, it's a victory, and it's also something we have to make sure that we're not tricked by.
Yes, it's absolutely both. It's a victory, and we have to keep building on that victory without getting tricked by just the superficial appearance of it. We should absolutely claim his changed vote as a victory for the anti-war movement because he's feeling the pressure. It's very much a victory for our campaign because that is specifically the threat he's facing. It's not, look, there is an entire mood against Israel right now. Yes, and I'm sure Adam Smith does not like it. But the specific thing that worries him is his election. He wants to win his election. And if we weren't running in the race, he wouldn't be worried at all. And even as you pointed out correctly, even until about a month ago, he was hoping that he could get away with everything he's doing because of the maneuver that the Republican and Democratic Party have played against us in this primary election, where there's one Republican and this one Democrat, they're both, the other Democrat, they're both running to take votes away from us, effectively so. And so, I think he was pretty confident overall. But now things have shifted. The dynamic has shifted, and he is nervous. And so our task is to not get complacent about that and understand that he's still the same guy, the same genocidal guy, and he's still taking money from the Zionist lobby and the war profiteers. You should see his filings for June. I mean, it's incredible the amount of money he has from executives in Palantir, Lockheed Martin, and as I said, the Zionist PACs. So nothing's changed other than the fact that he's nervous about his election. So what we should do is go deeper, try to win, try our best. We get into the November election and then turn that election into an electrifying campaign. And this is the reason that he and the Zionists and the billionaire class are afraid that obviously nobody can guarantee that anybody can win the election, especially as an independent socialist, as somebody who is fighting against the establishment. Things are always hard. None of my elections has been easy. We won all our 4 elections in Seattle, but none of them was easy. I always say, if your re-election is a cakewalk, then you're not really fighting for the working class because you don't pose a threat to the ruling class, because that's the way it is. So it's never going to be easy. But here's the deal. If we get into the November election, it will absolutely, and I'm not saying this just because it's my campaign, it will objectively be the most important race to watch because it will be arch Zionist warmonger Adam Smith against a revolutionary socialist, and we will be relentless in our campaign to expose his record. There will also be debates. That's another thing, Katie, I forgot to mention. He keeps talking about, can we just have a civil debate? Can you have a civil debate? While not allowing Crystal to say a word, he keeps speaking over her. He presented himself as some big debate lover. There has not been a single debate in this primary election. There was just one debate that was going to happen, not even in public, the stranger interview. He didn't show up for that interview because he didn't want to be, because that they do it as a debate. They don't interview separately. They do it as a debate. And he refused to show up. And he sent a pouting letter to the stranger about various grievances. And, so that this guy who apparently loves to debate, he didn't even show up to a debate because he's so afraid of confronting us. And in the general election, though, November election, he will not have a choice. There will be debates. I know there will be debates because that will be too important. So this is an absolutely historic opportunity to expose him in that way and potentially win the election. But for that, we need to get out the vote in this primary election. And we've already seen the impact of just our campaign gaining some momentum. He's suddenly now voting no on his own bill.
Right. That is crazy. So, and I also want to show, because as you've pointed out, he really likes presenting himself as a fan of civility and debate. And, we see this constantly, this kind of weaponization of civility. And it's especially disgusting when it's someone who has been supportive of a genocide. Like, we're supposed to care about decorum, but not blowing up kids. So when he released this statement about his vote in support of the Massey Amendment, which was cutting off funding. And he said, I'm deeply concerned about the tactics used by those on the far left to advocate for cutting off aid to Israel. To date, my family and I have had our home vandalized. A fire's been set in my driveway. My neighbors' lives have been disrupted by demonstrations in the middle of the night. Town halls meant to be forums for dialogue have been shut down, and a staff member has been physically assaulted. Those who engage in this type of behavior model a dangerous form of corrosive politics that seeks to intimidate those who disagree with them. We must be able to have civil discourse if we want to solve difficult problems, and I remain committed to open, respectful engagement. So what is your response to this statement?
He doesn't have any respect for any type of debate or discourse. In fact, he never shows up for debates, and it is precisely what you're saying. It's a weaponization of decorum. Yeah, you're funding the blowing up of kids, and as was pointed out in Breaking Points, the biggest number of child amputees. Oh, that's okay, but oh, God forbid you say something challenging. You're not showing the appropriate decorum for a 29-year incumbent. All of this is political gaslighting. This idea that somehow the left, that the anti-war left is somehow at fault. I'm sure you heard this before. I think in 2024 or 2025, he called anti-war activists left-wing fascists and demanded that they be arrested. And he's saying basically the same thing. And I don't know about all these other things that he's claiming happened, but as far as people being able to do a peaceful protest somewhere in the vicinity of his house, why is that not fair game? When this guy is literally funding the blowing up of the homes and the bodies of the people in Gaza and also in Lebanon, but that's okay. But God forbid a peaceful protest march come anywhere within 50 feet of your house, which is where we were. I mean, we carried out a protest, peaceful protest. It was not literally right at his house. It was several feet away from it. But he's complaining about that. And you know something, Katie? I don't know if this has made national news, but the political establishment is so in lockstep with all of this Zionist agenda that in Bellevue, which is the local city he lives in, which is part of our congressional district where I'm running, the Bellevue City Council just a few weeks ago literally passed a law that says protest movements cannot go near any elected officials' houses, only to protect Adam Smith, because he's the only one getting protested, because he's the genocidal guy. So, people are protesting him. Can you believe this?
You can't tolerate that? Then don't run for public office, or don't be in public office, right?
Or maybe don't fund genocide.
Oh, well, that too, right? Exactly. Yeah, of course. Yeah. That would be even better. But it's just so funny. I mean, it's like these people who ask for so much sympathy they don't afford the people of Palestine, obviously, or protesters, right? They're fine backing the most, like, I mean, it's genocidal, but it's also like it's hard to even use this word bullying, but it's just so, Israel is so good at like killing kids, right? This is like not combat. This is, I mean, there's Hamas resistance, but what they're really good at is like doing things from a distance and avoiding risking their lives at all costs. And it is just amazing to see this guy kind of call for civility when he again is funding a genocide, and also a genocide that happens to be fought in the most bullying. It's almost like, I mean, it's an understatement, but it's just such an irony, because there's absolutely like no parity there. It's not a war, it's a genocide. And to hear him kind of like crying about that, about the way that he's being treated is really rich. So Kshama, I want to ask you about this Breaking Points interview. And I think that, I've been on Crystal's show. Crystal has been on this show. I think she actually did an excellent job exposing the kind of rank hypocrisy of Adam Smith. But you wrote a post on X in response to this appearance. And let's put this post on the screen. This is this is Kshama's tweet about Crystal's interview.
I don't think that we have that set up, Katie. I didn't see that in the rundown.
Okay. Is that Is that there, Nate?
But if you give me a moment,
Oh,
I'm sure
okay.
that I
Yeah.
can
Okay. Sorry about
pull
that.
it up. Apologies.
Yes. Yeah, my apologies for that. It was supposed to be in the rundown. So we will have that in 1 second.
And I don't know if you were saving it for later, but in the meantime, we also had 1 or 2 additional clips from that.
Yeah, sure. Let's, so what do we have? We have, sorry about this. We put this, let's see.
Well, we have one clip about him talking about the abolishing ICE, and then an additional one where he breaks down why, according to him, why he was not voting for the.
Okay, let's watch that one, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because I'll tell you the concerns, from me personally,
Sure.
I think shared a lot by our audience is you are well aware there is a reckoning happening with regard to the U.S. relationship
100%.
with Israel, especially in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And so what appears from the outside is that while votes are increasingly becoming difficult for Israel to win in terms of overt aid being granted,
Right.
this would be a way to secure the Israel-U.S. relationship without having that transparency and that democratic accountability that would come from a vote. So that's the concern, is that it would make the Israeli-U.S. military relationship more entrenched in a way that lacks any sort of democratic accountability.
Yeah, no, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, we're talking about.
What are your concerns then?
Oh, sorry, 2 different questions here.
Yeah.
My concern is I don't support the Netanyahu government, and I certainly don't support what Ben Gurion and Smotrich are doing. And that's been, I think, the real challenge for me is Israel has a right to exist. Israel is threatened profoundly by Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. So how do we help them defend themselves? Well, at the same time, they've got a government that's frankly out of control.
Okay, again, none of that changed. But what's your response to that?
Well, it is, again, it's like moving the goalpost, like in the sense that they were blithely bombing or funding the bombing of Palestinian people for so many years, and the brutal occupation, the settlements, all of that. Now that there is a little bit of reckoning on that, now they're making it all about Netanyahu. Obviously, Netanyahu is a monstrous individual, but this is a question of the whole state, the whole apartheid state as a whole. And so this is a way for Adam Smith to try to find an out of this by saying, well, I think it's Netanyahu's fault, and I'm certainly against it. And also, if you've noticed throughout that show, Katie, the way he spoke, as if he's, well, 2 things, 2 observations, and this is part of how the corporate discourse, that ends up befuddling, genuine people because of the way it's presented. One is that he makes his tone sound so reasonable, like, he's the genocidal guy. He's the one with an absolutely shockingly inhumane and murderous agenda, but somehow he makes it, the way he speaks, you're supposed to think that this is all reasonable and all of that. And then the other thing is saying that this is all this is all happening. Even he talked about the austerities, like, oh yeah, it's happening. What do you mean it's happening? You have been in office for 29 years.
Right.
You were one of the instigators of all of this. So he acts like he is. If you didn't think about this carefully, he sounds like he was just an innocent bystander, and that he has the same critique you do. He kept saying repeatedly when Crystal was presenting various positions, she would say, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you.
Right.
What do you mean?
No,
you are one of the main warmongers. You are one of the arch
Right.
Zionists. You are an AIPAC darling. What the hell do you mean? And so look at his whole track record, right? We've already covered his record on the wars and the genocide and all of that.
Oh yeah, and the Iraq War too, right?
And the Iraq War.
That's
He's one
crazy.
of the remaining 5 House Democrats who voted for the Iraq War. And he voted for the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which was part of the dismantling of the regulations, which was in part responsible for the Great Recession in 2008. Then under both Bush and Obama, he voted to bail out the big banks repeatedly, leaving ordinary people in the lurch, including homeowners. A lot of those homes were made over to private equity, which is the single biggest reason why rents are also skyrocketing, because now Wall Street firms own a lot of this rental housing. And he also voted to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicare and Medicaid. This was long before Trump came along. So, and he has cut tens of billions of dollars from public housing. I mean, on and on and on it goes. He voted to create ICE. He has voted to fund ICE to the tune of nearly $115 billion. I mean, my campaign did this calculation. So this across the board, he is responsible for war, genocide, and austerity against the American working people. And he acts like he's just an innocent observer. This guy is one of the most villainous in the Democratic Party, and he really needs to be taken out. Can I just point out the King County, King County Democratic Party's Progressive Voters Guide just came out, and they have endorsed 3 Zionist pro-genocide Democrats: Susan DelBene, Kim Schreier, and Adam Smith. They've endorsed, this is the
And they're called Progressive?
Yes, this is the Progressive Voters Guide. And in that, they say something like, unfortunately, over the course of his tenure in Congress, Smith has been criticized for his more hawkish foreign policy stances. So in other words, look at the gaslighting here too. Like, not that he's being criticized for his positions, that his positions are bad. He's like, and unfortunate. He's like, the criticism is unfortunate.
Right. That's the lamentable thing, not his actual positions. It's and then he's been smeared, except by smeared, we mean literally reported on.
Yes. And then it goes on to say his foreign policy stances have drawn protests at his home. And, so it's like basically meant to create sympathy for this guy.
Right. Right. Again, why does that matter? Like, okay, yes, protests at his home versus bombings at people's homes in Gaza, or, rape. How about torture? Like the bombings and targetings of hospitals. It is really wow. And they call themselves progressive. That is really disgusting.
Seriously. And all the evidence that Israel is targeting children.
Yes.
And journalists and medical professionals. I mean, it's horrific.
It's not collateral damage. It's intentional. Yeah. And I really urge everyone to see this documentary, American Doctor. And, they use snipers, like they target the kids. And as one of the doctors, Feroz Sidwa, points out, like, you don't get these numbers by accident. You don't get these higher numbers by accident. And the rate is like hundreds of times higher than it is in Russia, for instance. So it's not like this doesn't just go with the territory. And, it's really fascinating because disturbing. You see this documentary shows some media clips, and they're like, well, of course, we can't confirm that. CNN can't confirm any of these claims. And another thing that you see is like, again, and this is an example of how complicit the media is. You hear people saying things like, well, they were hiding a terrorist or using this hospital for military support. Like, first of all, it's almost always not true. But even if it were, that's a war crime. You're not allowed to just do anything you want because there is someone like that in a hospital. It's just stunning. But so speaking of media and critiques, you, as I was saying, you responded to Crystal Ball's, I would say, very good interview with Adam Smith. Let's just throw your tweet up on the screen. We won't read the whole thing. I'm just going to quote one part of it. So, hold on a second. So you wrote, how does it serve the cause of Palestinian liberation for you to platform Adam Smith and to not even mention that there is an anti-war socialist challenger to him? So expand on that. And has anyone from Breaking Points reached out to you since then? And what are your thoughts on the overall interview?
Yeah, the interview itself was pretty good. I mean, Crystal did a great job, just holding him, just never letting him weasel away from the position that he was carrying out.
And she kept her cool, which I couldn't have done. I would have been so frustrated by how condescending he was. So
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely props for that. No doubt. And I think that these types of hard-hitting interviews are necessary, and they've happened. Too few of them do happen. And as it turned out, this one happened because Adam Smith reached out to her, and he had some convoluted idea that it was going to be good for his campaign, but also because he's under threat from our campaign. So the whole the occurring of the interview, the basis of that is that he is feeling threatened from our campaign. So it's just jarring to have that whole interview happen, as good as it was, which I'm not denying, to not even mention that he has an opponent who is credible enough that this guy is running scared from his own bill.
Right. Yes.
You know, that
Right.
is the real credibility. I mean, you know, if you want a sign of how much momentum this campaign has and potential that it has, and that you should help this campaign. And so, that's one point. And the other thing I would say is that it is like I said, it is really important that we have such interviews where these politicians who always have a cozy time at NBC or CNN, that they really be forced to answer some tough questions. That's important. But I will also say that in itself is no threat to him. As long as he gets to win his re-election, and he will win if I don't get into the November election. If I get into the November election, then it's in real question whether he wins or not. But if I don't get in, then it's a cakewalk for him.
Right. Right.
But so I don't agree that it really provides any kind of challenge in itself to this agenda of Zionism and the billionaires if we are not presenting actual threats to their very existence. In other words, the best way to expose a politician and really, really hold their feet to the fire, if you want to use that phrase, is to present an actual challenge to their career. Right now, Adam Smith is scared, not because of a generally existing mood of anti-Zionism. He's scared of losing his own election. That is the specific thing he's scared about. And so I don't understand how journalistically it makes sense for a 45-minute interview to be done and not even mention that there is somebody running against him who has won previous elections. Even if you think that this campaign is not strong enough to go forward to the November election, two things are true. One is that I have a whole track record of winning all my elections and winning historic victories like the nation's highest minimum wage, and also the demands we are running on. Those are very powerful demands. Those are demands that the working class wants to hear about. That is why we have this momentum from this campaign, because these demands are so popular. Ending all military aid and ending and a permanent arms embargo. We have other demands too, but that was the topic of the interview, so that's why I'm mentioning those. Okay. So I do think that it is important that journalists talk about our campaign and also interview our campaign, because it is not, I don't agree with this sort of circular logic that, and this is not crystal ball, but I think Ryan Grimm said something to this effect something to the effect of, it's not a quote, paraphrasing, that it's not a viable campaign, so I'm not going to help make it viable. So because we are not viable on day one, we become viable by building the campaign, by left interviewers interviewing us like this interview today. This is what helps us build the momentum. And so I think everybody has a collective responsibility to build that kind of momentum if we actually want to build the anti-war movement and we actually want to end the genocide. So ultimately, I want to be clear, I don't have any personal grievances with anybody on Breaking Points. What I want is for this campaign to succeed and get into the November election. And so with that goal in mind, I think it's crucial that we have this campaign covered everywhere else. And also just to make it clear how viable this campaign is, we've raised $700,000. This as an independent socialist campaign. The median donation of our campaign is $25. The median donation of Adam Smith's campaign is $1,000. Right. So, clearly we have 8.5 times more donors, than independent donors than he does. In other words, far more numbers of people are donating to our campaign, but obviously the average amount they're donating is smaller because they're not Lockheed Martin executives campaign. So, but it is far from a fringe campaign. It is not a fringe campaign. Right. It is an actual campaign with a real chance. So it's absurd. It would be absurd to argue that it is not. But like I said, I have no personal bad feelings towards any particular person on the left. What I want is for this campaign to succeed because it is in the interest of the Palestinian people and the working class. That is why I appreciate Crystal reaching out, and she, I sent her a message, and I messaged Ryan Grimm also, and then they're going to have me on Monday.
There you go. But I'm going to say it's the Katie Halper Show bump, no matter what. Yes. No matter what the chronology is, we're going to say it was the Katie Halper Show bump.
Hey, there's a Katie Halper bump no matter what.
No matter what.
Don't underestimate that. I'm not even joking. It's really true.
Yes. Thank you. And your election is coming up really soon. There you go. Defeat AIPAC, elect the socialists who beat the billionaires. Do you want to? I mean, I think it's worth showing Ryan's response. I'm glad that it sounds like you guys are moving forward, but I would like to respond to it. Again, not in a vicious way. I think that it raises important issues. So let's show Ryan's response to someone, I guess, pressuring Ryan and Breaking Points or Drop Site News to have Kshama on.
I think it was Brianna Joy Gray's.
Okay, response, right? Yes, and Brianna, of course, has had you on as a big supporter here. So someone brought up the fact that you had been endorsed by The Stranger, right? And Ryan goes, The Stranger endorsed, and again, I think Ryan does very good work. He's been on the show, and he will in the future. The Stranger endorsement is a good argument. I see Kshama also just got an endorsement from Seattle Gay News, which helps make the case too. This is the kind of thing I've been asking for. Evidence the campaign is real and not just a waste of working people's money. Instead, the argument I can get back is, quote, you're a Democratic sheepdogger, shill, whatever, end quote. The case against Sawant is that she can't build a coalition big enough to win because she and her followers are sectarians more interested in attacking DSA or those close to them than building a coalition. And the response to this just fortifies that reputation. But if the campaign has real juice, I don't care about that. Happy to have her on. Also, nobody from the campaign itself has reached out to me to pitch an interview. If somebody from the campaign wants to reach out and make the pitch, I'm happy to hear it and open to any serious insurgent campaign. That's how every other campaign does it because that's what makes sense. And also, you guys are overrating the power of a BP or Drop Site, Breaking Point or Drop Site interview, but that's fine. I'm happy for people to do that. Anyway, DMs are open, just make the case, end quote. So I do think, though, that a few things. One is that it's kind of not up to, I would say, I understand like coverage, and this is something a lot of us don't want to admit, but coverage choices and interview choices, there is a kind of, in some ways, an inherent endorsement on some level, right? You may not be saying, go vote for this person, but there is something perhaps legitimizing, although obviously they had on Adam Smith, and that was the opposite of legitimizing, right? That was like totally scathing, and rightly so. But I also think that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy issue here, which is that someone's not viable, perhaps because they don't get media, right? That is like, so when you put them on the show, you're helping them become more viable. But also, I just think it's newsworthy, like someone's race, whether or not you think it's a viable race. And certainly we've seen examples like, I have friends who were big Zohran supporters who called it a vanity campaign at the beginning. And so I think that there's a lot of stuff to this does raise a lot of important questions, and I'm glad that it looks like they will have you on. But also, even to the extent, like, let's say you're not a viable campaign, there's power in highlighting and platforming someone like you, precisely because even though it's superficial, like the more you scare, and of course, this is not a guarantee, and politicians lie all the time, and we again have to be vigilant. But the more you scare the person into changing his position, right? And again, I want to be clear. I don't think that, Adam Smith, I'm sure, will make promises that if he, knock on wood, I hope this doesn't happen, but if he wins, he will run away from. But it's still important to raise as much the profile of someone who has the right ideas as much as possible, regardless of whether they'll win.
Yes, absolutely. I could not have said it better, Katie. I really agree with everything you're saying. In fact, it reminds me of what Eugene Debs, the great American socialist, said, that I would much rather vote for what I want and not get it than vote for what I don't want and get it. And I think that really that political difference that lies at the heart of what Ryan Grimm is saying. He says, I don't want to waste working people's money. Well, that raises a question to my mind when I saw that. Like, what do you consider a waste of working people's money?
Another right.
Because is it a waste of working people's money to support a campaign that has raised $700,000 and that comes on the heels of 4 election victories in Seattle of somebody who has never sold out the working class and who has a whole history of winning working class victories and who's running a campaign on incredibly important demands like ending all military aid and a permanent arms embargo? Is that a waste of money? Or is it a waste of money to vote for Democrats who keep selling you out over and over and over and over again? So I think there is a difference in political thinking here. And that is what's driving all of this. Obviously, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. And, Ryan Grimm is free to say what he thinks. And like I said, I don't have any personal animosity towards anyone. But if you're talking about, if we want to take what they're saying at face value and say, well, it's about what's viable, well, Marianne Williamson was never a viable campaign, but they covered that campaign to death. They covered it a lot. So is it not deceptive for the working class to prop up Marianne Williamson in that way when, I mean, first of all, it's not only that she was not viable. I don't support her, period. But if viability is your criterion indeed, then how do you explain that? And ultimately, it is, I think, ultimately, none of that is as important as what I think is important, which is, can we talk about what we actually need for the working class? What we need is fighters for the working class. And so even if you have disagreements with me, you can see that my track record is as a fighter. I have never sold out. You may agree or disagree with me, but you don't find me bullshitting on anything, you know? And if I change my position on something, or if I feel like I need to say something, have a different position or something, I will say it openly. I will say, yeah, I thought about this and this is what I think. I never, ever bullshit. That is not something I'm guilty of. And I've never sold out. I've always taken an average worker's wage and donated the rest of my elected salary to social movements. And I'm running against arch Zionist Adam Smith. How can this not make it a viable campaign? How can it not be the correct thing, the right thing to do on behalf of the Palestinian people and the working class to feature this campaign? That is what I'm talking about. And ultimately, just one last thing, it's very important to clarify. I don't agree with sectarian. I mean, his definition of sectarianism seems to be that I have some critiques of DSA leaders. That's not sectarianism. Of course, the left has to have debates. In fact, we have to have open discussions and debates. Yeah. That's not sectarianism. Sectarianism is when you refuse to have a priority of interests on what's good for the working class in order to just make your internal point or to score a personal score or something like that. Or to keep funding for your own organization, as some of the black gatekeepers did during BLM. They refused to support our Tax Amazon campaign because the Democratic Party promised them money for their NGOs, their own pet NGOs. That is a classic definition of sectarianism and grifting and all of that. But for us to have a critique of other leaders on the left, that's not sectarian. We will absolutely support any progress for the working class, no matter what other disagreements we have with whoever else is putting that forward. And so I think that in that spirit, and also keeping the interests of American working people and the Palestinian people at the center, I think it is everybody on the left's collective responsibility to help our campaign get into November.
Kshama, how much time do you have so I can prioritize my questions?
I can probably stay for another 10 minutes.
Okay, great. So wanted to ask you about something that doesn't get a lot of attention. In fact, I know a little bit about this issue, but not a lot. And I had no idea about the existence of this in the United States. Let me just, okay. So you have helped lead the charge in the country in banning discrimination based on caste. You authored legislation about this while part of the Seattle City Council, and which became the first in the country to ban it. So tell us more about this struggle, like the history of caste. And I know that this exists in India, and I had no idea that it was something that happened here. So tell us a little bit about this. And I remember one of the times I had you on, actually, you talked about this because it was the international, I think it may have been the International Dalit Day or something. So tell us about this and the fact that it exists here.
Yes, yeah. So the caste system is something that it's a form of oppression, a system of discrimination and oppression that has existed in South Asia for about roughly 2,000 years. And it exists still today for the same reason that racism still exists in America and all over the world, because these types of oppressions are something that capitalism creates, because it's part of their divide and conquer strategy to divide up the billions of people in the international working class. And so caste not only persists in India, and it can be really horrific, where it's by birth, like you're born into a lower caste or an upper caste family. And then you can face horrific forms of discrimination, sometimes even just violence, rape of Dalit women. Dalit is the Indian word for the lower caste person or oppressed caste person.
Which has been known in case it rings bells for Reba, the untouchable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that was the historic name, and then the community adopted their own name, Dalit. Exactly. And so it can take horrific forms in India. Outright violence, as I said, rape of Dalit women is very common. Unfortunately, it is really brutal. In the United States, obviously, it doesn't take those forms, but it still exists. Caste discrimination is really pervasive. As the South Asian immigration has grown dramatically over the last 20, 30 years, now you're seeing this here as well. And so our bill to ban caste-based discrimination in Seattle is so historic that it is the first such bill anywhere outside South Asia. And to date, it remains the only such bill. And I say that because there was, right after we won in Seattle, there was an effort in California. And then earlier this year, there was an effort in New York State. Both of them failed. They both failed, even though they are Democratic dominated states, especially California's story is instructive. It is like the story of CalCare, the Medicare for all in California, which has been crushed by the Democratic Party 4 times in the last 10 years, even though the state has a Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, and the state legislature's 2 houses have either a supermajority or a near supermajority of the Democratic Party. And it is the Democratic Party that ended up crushing the effort for caste discrimination also, where they ended up rewriting the bill in such a way that it opened the door, it paved the way for Gavin Newsom to veto the bill. It's really terrible. And so it really shows, the people who were invested in defeating that bill in California, they were active in Seattle as well. These are the people who are the supporters of the right-wing government of Modi, Narendra Modi, the prime minister in India. And he leads a movement called Hindutva, meaning it's right-wing Hindu people. It's like the Christian, the right-wing Christian fundamentalists. Yeah, sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Christian fundamentalist movement. And so there's so many people, very wealthy people in the United States who are sponsoring Hindutva in India and also in the US. And if you look at the donations that people have taken, both Democrats and Republicans have donations from these people. And so they're becoming more and more of a powerful entity. And they fought against our bill in Seattle also, and they fought against it in California. But we won in Seattle. They didn't win in California. And the simple reason, Katie, is exactly what we did, which is a class struggle-based fighting strategy, where we forced the Democrats to vote yes on it, even though they hated taking a position on that, because because the Democratic Party doesn't, especially this was under Biden, they did not want to take a position that's antagonistic to the Indian government. But we forced them to take it. That's the main thing. In California, they specifically rejected our approach, the leaders of that movement. They even went so far as to say things like, Kshama should not come here. We don't want her here in California interfering in our effort here, because they were so convinced that my fighting approach is the wrong way to go, and the way to do it is to have cozy relations with the Democratic Party. And guess what? The Democratic Party stabbed them in the back, and they didn't win it. I mean, imagine if we had won it in California, that would have been a huge victory. But nonetheless, Seattle's victory is an international victory. I mean, it went viral, Katie. I mean, I ended up doing interviews for Indian media in Indian languages, which I speak, but it's not easy for me to speak politics in those languages. But I had to bone up my Hindi and Marathi in order to do those interviews, because it was viral news. And even now, people are really inspired by that. And also, people are learning lessons, because California lost, New York lost. Why is that? Why did Seattle win? So people are starting to learn the lessons, which is very important.
And tell us more about your own personal and political trajectory, where you grew up, when you came to the United States, and how your experience shaped your political views.
Yeah, I grew up in a regular working/middle class home in India. I was born in Pune, which I think is a city where you have connections.
Yes. In fact, I'm wearing a shirt today from a store called Either Or. I don't know if you know about this store, Either Or. it's like it's very, they don't use sweatshops. They use they work with people and like collectives. And so in honor of you and Pune, yes, we have good friends. My friend met a woman. He's an ethnomusicologist and was studying sitar. He's a white American dude. And he met this wonderful woman who's actually a therapist, who I should have on the show. She's a physician and a therapist, very popular on Instagram, actually. And yeah, so we visited them. And so I'm wearing this Pune Space Stores shirt. Okay.
Katie, this is so brilliant, because I was thinking this whole time that I love that shirt and it looks kind of Indian.
Funny, yeah.
I wonder if it is, but obviously we were speaking politics, so I didn't want to inject all of that. But yeah, that's so incredible. Yeah, I was born in that city that you're talking about, Pune, and I grew up in Mumbai, which is this big city like New York, some distance from Pune. And my earliest memory was of having this question in my mind. It was both a moral and a scientific question. And I was obsessed with this question, which is that how is it that with all the progress of humanity, all the technological innovations, all this wealth that generated, how is it that there is an ocean of misery around us? How is it possible? And all the answers that I got were really stupid answers, like it's karma, or they don't work hard. I'm like, are you kidding me? These are some of the hardest working people who are in misery. And so my conclusion was there was something systemic, but I didn't have anybody to tell me that my thinking was nothing strange, and in fact this is Marxism. But so I came to the US, and I was just shocked to find out that even in the richest nation in the world, you have poverty, you have racism, all of that. And so I think all of that drew me towards Marxism, and it's just a quirk of fate that I came all the way to the Pacific Northwest and then found people that I agree with. And then, yeah, since then I've never looked back. But as far as running for office, that was not my personal decision. And I think that is very important to share, because careerism is the death knell of movement. So when people run for office or rise to prominence to further their own career ambitions, that can be a slippery slope to selling out, because then it becomes a choice of, are you going, you have to keep good relations in order to further your career, and that means selling out. It's like AOC described it as reputational and relational harm, which, I don't agree with her on many things, but she captured it accurately. Right. This is what you need to go through, but that is required. You cannot have good relations with powerful people and win victories for the working class. That's an imaginary universe. That universe doesn't exist. So you have to wear your antagonism with the powerful people as a badge of honor, because you're fighting for the working class. In any case, the reason I mentioned it as part of my personal story is that it is important to share that I didn't just wake up one day and decide I'm going to run for office. We collectively decided that running for office might be a really good avenue to build the working class struggle. And so who the candidate should be, whether we should run an election campaign, who the candidate should be, and what the program of demand should be, all of this is democratically discussed. And it's just, unfortunately for me, I was the candidate.
Yeah, what are they? There's an expression, heroes aren't made, they're cornered.
Yeah, I was definitely cornered. Yeah.
You always wanted whether it's like someone running for office or like a school principal or a college president, you always want a reluctant administrator.
Yes.
Well, Kshama, any final words for this interview before you leave us? And thank you so much for your time, generosity, and thoughtfulness.
Thank you so much, Katie. Likewise for all those things. Maybe we should add, since we were talking about caste, just in terms of why building movements is so necessary, is that I expected that the Modi administration would retaliate against me personally. And they've blacklisted me, and I'm not getting a visa to go to India. And so I haven't seen my mom and my sister and my family for over 4 years. And my mom is getting older. And so this is the kind of price. Awful. Yeah, exactly. It's really awful that we have to pay. But the reason I mentioned that is that our only defense against this is to build mass movements and really fighting to win this election. There is no way that I alone can fight against Modi. We have to fight together against the right wing. against the billionaires, and it has to be an international movement. And I hope that everybody who's watching this will help us. Go to kshamasawant.org, donate, sign up for a phone banking shift. And listen, if you live anywhere in driving or carpool distance of our district, Congressional District 9 in Washington State, you have no excuse. You have to sign up for canvassing shifts. And if none of the shifts work for your schedule, email our campaign. We will make a shift around your schedule. We need to go out there and talk to working people. And we need to do what we are calling the force multiplier, meaning every person going out, talking to 25, 30 people in one shift, maybe more. That means that those are then going to talk to other people. That is the kind of force multiplier we need urgently. The election is on August 4th. The ballots have already gone out. People are already voting. So we want to make sure we can maximize the vote for this campaign and be one of the top 2 vote getters for November.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And yes, it's a jungle primary. So it's actually in some ways easier for you to get to the top. So to take him on Adam Smith. Well, thank you so much, Kshama.
Thank you so much, Katie. A real pleasure talking to you. Take care.
Of course. Great. Bye. That was wonderful. So glad that we got to talk to Kshama. And actually, I've been meaning to have her on again. I had her on years ago, and then I was reminded to have her on. It's like kind of serendipitous. A couple of people were like, "Oh, are you going to have her on?" And I said yes. And then I saw this online, and it was a reminder of how soon the election was. And I thought there was a very interesting conversation online. So again, thank you to Kshama, and we will put her the link to her campaign in the description. Now, we are so excited to be bringing on another excellent guest who's also been on the show before. And she's going to be talking about something very important, very disturbing. Her name is Tara Al-Alami, and she is a Palestinian writer and organizer and member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective. And she's going to talk about this very upsetting but extremely important, not to be ignored, report on Israel's use of sexualized violence. So welcome back to the show, Tara.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you for joining, and also thank you for doing the work that you do. This is a report that you guys at the Palestinian Feminist Collective wrote with the support from the Progressive International. Can you outline some of the most important or most significant findings of this? And it's called "A Predatory State: Israeli Systemic Sexualized and Gendered Violence Against Palestinians."
Yeah, so I mean, everyone can download the report on predatorystate.org. It's almost 200 pages. It's essentially a chronological, history of the use of sexualized violence and gendered violence against Palestinians since the beginning, or since the beginning of the Nakba, since the establishment of Israel. Until as late as April 2026. So, with all this evidence and, including testimonies, but also a few case studies through which we analyze, for example, the use of AI to enact gendered violence, blackmail, honey traps, and coercion, with the creation of false relationships with Palestinians to infiltrate political groups and communities, all the way to the subjugation of Palestinians to sexualized torture and rape and humiliation. Our analysis is that Israel is committing this sort of violence, sexualized and gendered violence, with genocidal intent. And we have a few, we have 4 key findings.
Sorry, Tara, can you do, sorry, just because this is so important. Do you have a pen or like I hear a noise, like it sounds like a,
oh no,
or like a necklace. I hear this like
it's my necklace. That's that's awful.
Oh no, is it making noise?
I don't know. Is it still?
Brad, do you hear that? Like it sounds like like you're hitting a rosary or something. Not that I've ever held a rosary in my life.
Yeah. It might be my bracelet.
Bracelet. Moving. That's what it is. Yeah.
I'll stop moving my hand.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, I'm so sorry. I just, because it's so important, I didn't want the noise in there. So the 4, you cut you off. You said there are 4 findings.
Yeah, we have four key findings. One of them is that the scale and consistency of this sort of violence throughout or since the establishment of Israel, with evidence that documents distinctive acts and strategies that are carried out with a consistent pattern against Palestinians in different contexts. So within prisons, outside of prisons, within makeshift detention centers, as we've seen in Gaza, within people's homes, and just everywhere on Palestinian land, illustrates the institutionalized dehumanization of Palestinians that is orchestrated to enact collective harm and collective punishment against Palestinians. The second finding is that the methods of sexualized violence that we analyze constitute a pattern that is clearly derived from a coordinated policy and a mandate. So it's not a random or incidental
a few bad apples.
Exactly. It's not, the lone act of a cartoonishly evil soldier or settler. It's systematic and it's carried out with intent and consistency that can only be a result of protocols that are mandated and institutionalized within this settler colony and also ingrained within the culture that sustains it. The third finding is that, this is the purpose of the sexualized or the purpose of the enactment of this violence is to inflict collective terror on Palestinians. That this is, even if the crime is committed on an individual, so a certain Palestinian prisoner is sexually tortured, for example, the intent is to inflict harm on the entire Palestinian nation because of the sheer depravity of these acts, their breadth and the scope of this torture and violence that this report reveals can only be seen as an attempt to eliminate Palestinians through ethnic cleansing and mass murder, with explicit articulations of intent to kill. And so importantly, now that people are or now that for the past 3 years we've been saying that Israel has been committing genocide against the Palestinian people using these legal frameworks within international law, using the definitions of international law, it's important to utilize also and to say that sexualized violence and torture and gendered violence are both being carried out with genocidal intent, and they are both part of this genocidal crime. The last finding, or the final finding, is that there's been a clear acceleration of sexualized violence since the appointment of Ben Gurion as the Minister of National Security in 2022. And several reports have come out, testimonies even before the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, that indicate beyond any doubt, beyond attempts to deny, even though I'm not really seeing any attempts to deny from the Israeli population or state. In fact, they're actively celebrating it and inciting rape. But beyond any attempts to doubt this evidence, it proves that sexualized violence is part of a larger arsenal of strategies that are used to destroy the Palestinian people, used to attack Palestinian peoplehood, livelihood, and futurity on Palestinian land.
And can you explain why you use the term sexualized violence instead of sexual violence?
Yeah, actually, I mean, this was part of a debate that we had internally while working on this report. So when people look at the report, they'll see that at the beginning we have a glossary of different terms. The reason we chose sexualized violence is because certain types of violence that we've observed, for example, sexual humiliation, all the way to rape, sexual torture, fit different definitions or meet different criteria of types of violence. And so we use sexualized violence as an umbrella term to encompass all of these types of violence. So to encompass sexual humiliation that can take the form of, for example, forcing prisoners to undress in front of each other, forcing prisoners to wear underwear that does not fit them properly, specifically women prisoners, all the way to being raped by a group of Israeli soldiers as an individual alone or in front of other prisoners, and you know, also, of course, as we've all seen, the photos of Israeli soldiers after they invade the homes of Palestinians, taking pictures of with lingerie and sort of weaponizing intimacy and sexuality against the Palestinian people in an attempt to humiliate them. And so the use of sexualized violence is supposed to be was intentional to sort of, you know, act as an umbrella term that could, you know, have all of these forms of violence fall, you know, underneath it.
You know, I think something that's really important is that much like people are saying, oh, it's Netanyahu who's bad, or, you know, Israel got bad in 1967, Israel got out of control. You know, that framing seduces a lot of people. And of course, it's inaccurate, it's ahistorical, and it obfuscates the fact that it was foundational, right? Ethnic cleansing was always part of the plan. And kind of likewise, some people I'm sure think, oh, this sexual torture that we're seeing now, this sexualized violence, this is something new. When, as your report outlines, and some people already know this, I mean, there've been excellent writing about this, this sexualized violence was foundational as well, used to ethnically cleanse. There are absolutely haunting writings about this, and we'll review some of those. But can you give some context to this? And then we'll talk about something that, for instance, like Ben Gurion actually, you know, Freudian slip, Ben Gurion wrote about. He was the first prime minister of Israel. So, and I'm switching chairs, so I'm going to go off screen if that's okay. I'm listening, but I have to switch chairs. So.
Absolutely.
Okay,
do your thing, switch your chair. So, I mean, the report begins with testimonies and evidence from 1948. Evidence that was collected from published diaries of the early Jewish settlers who formed the armed gangs and militias that terrorized Palestinians and depopulated our villages using threats of rape, but also, importantly, enacting rape against Palestinians. What's really important to notice, or one of the patterns that we noticed while looking at this evidence and compiling it, is that sexual slavery was an important strategy for these early Zionist gangs and militias that were invading Palestinian towns and depopulating them. This included things like gang rape and the kidnapping of Palestinian girls, threats to kidnap them, threats to rape them, but also actual kidnapping and gang rape of girls and women in an attempt to instill fear in Palestinians at the time and force them to flee their villages. The thing about, you know, these claims about Netanyahu being an especially evil person or Ben Gurion being an especially evil person is that, you know, as we all know, and I'm sure a lot of your audience knows, it completely erases the context of the establishment of the settler colonial state on Palestinian land. Not only because there's clear evidence that sexual violence and threats of rape were used against Palestinians in the beginning of the Nakba to force them to leave, to flee and to ethnically cleanse our land, but also because it's a complete misunderstanding of the power dynamic and the framework within which this sort of violence happens in a settler colony. And so erases entirely, a history outside of Palestine of sexualized violence and torture and gendered violence being used against native people, colonized people, in the establishment of these settler colonial states, and also sort of, launders this narrative that this is just, like I said, one cartoonishly evil person. I think, one thing that really over the past 2 years has made this, I think as clear as possible. And I think that's why I sort of find it really confusing when people try to minimize or perhaps question the use of sexual violence by Israel against Palestinians, is that you would think that a society and a state that seem to be 100% aligned on alleging that Israeli women were systemically raped by Palestinians on October 7, and also entirely intent on using that hoax as one of the justifications for this genocide in Gaza, and further annexation of Palestinian land in the West Bank and Jerusalem. You would think that the state and its population would not be so eager to jump on the opportunity to rally in favor of rape and torture of Palestinian prisoners in particular, but Palestinians in general. You would think they would not so, brazenly incite or celebrate rape as a strategy.
Right.
And yet here we are, and that can only mean one thing. It can only indicate one thing, which is that this is a settler society and a colony that was built and continues to be sustained by a depraved culture that is entirely based on torture, whether sexualized or not. It's entirely based on the oppression and exploitation of Palestinians and their land. And this is not only allowed to happen, it doesn't only slip through the cracks, it's the very foundation upon which the society and state were established.
Right. Yeah, and you have also, the Knesset member saying that it's legitimate to insert sticks into people's rectums. You have these rapists becoming like celebrities on late night television. You have comedians making jokes about dog rape. It's kind of like pick a narrative, right? Like either these are, blood libel, anti-Semitic lies, and if people are just listening, not watching, I'm putting those in air quotes because it's obviously a lie. Or it's something that you are okay protesting for the right for, calling legitimate, joking about, et cetera. So I wanted to start off, or I wanted to bring up one of the really disturbing examples. Brad, you have the screenshot, right, from this an article. We're going to see a diary entry of Ben Gurion describing something extremely disturbing.
And Katie, what I do have is the archived Haaretz article, which I think contains what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I saw fit to remove her from the world is the title of this article in Haaretz. Newly revealed documents obtained by Haaretz tell the long-hidden story of what Ben Gurion described as a quote-unquote horrific atrocity. In August 1949, an IDF unit caught a Bedouin girl, held her captive in a Negev outpost, gang-raped her, executed her at the order of the platoon commander, and buried her in a shallow grave in the desert. 20 soldiers who took part in the episode, including the platoon commander, were court-martialed and sent to prison. And I believe that we have, let me just grab this extremely disturbing thing that Ben Gurion says. And obviously, sorry, it goes without saying, this whole episode, this whole interview needs a trigger warning. So let's see. I'm looking for the actual quote. 1 second. 1 second. Okay, 1 second. Okay. I saw fit. Hold on 1 second. Okay. I'm really sorry about that. Okay, here it is. Okay, so this is in 2003, a seal was lifted on the personal diary of Israel's first prime minister, David Ben Gurion, and other classified Israeli military documents. Reporting on the newly declassified materials, Haaretz published a story on the August 1949 abduction of a teenage Bedouin Palestinian girl from the Nakab, who was forced into sexual enslavement and gang raped by soldiers at the Nirim military outpost before she was killed and buried. Ben Gurion's August 22nd, 1949 diary entry shows that the highest ranks were aware of this case. He states it was decided and carried out. They washed her, cut her hair, raped her, and killed her. Testimonies from the 20 soldiers involved in the assault indicate that the order came from the platoon commander, identified only as Moshe. After the girl's abduction, Moshe gave his soldiers a speech on the importance of Zionism and their contributions to the formation of the new state. He concluded his speech by giving his soldiers two options regarding their captive. She was either to become a kitchen worker or their sex slave. In reply, the soldiers chanted, "We want to FUCK." Moshe then arranged a 3-day rape schedule for soldiers from 3 squads to take turns raping her. After the first night of enduring the gang rape and physical assault, the girl fell unconscious. The following morning, she resisted her assailants and was in turn executed and buried on Moshe's orders. So can you tell us more about this incident and the context and how we see this kind of as how and why this is not an isolated incident?
Yeah, I mean, first, one thing that I remembered about how difficult it was to research this, to do research for this report along with other collective members, is that these records that were unsealed at some point, after a 50-year threshold, they were declassified. A lot of them were later sealed and reclassified as top secret. And so there's evidence that does exist and did exist in that was open for the public that had then been resealed and reclassified as top secret by Israel. The other thing is of course the existence of this evidence only as reported exclusively by Israeli scholars and sources due to these physical restrictions to the records that are denied. And so this is just, you can imagine if this is a diary entry that was declassified and allowed to enter the public imagination and public discourse. You can imagine what exists that is still classified, what exists that is still hidden in Israeli archives. Or
that just died, that are like in the
or that was
ashes.
destroyed.
Yeah, were destroyed, or someone dies and they throw out their diary. Right, yeah.
Exactly. Destroyed or only existing within the memories of the people that perpetrated them.
Right.
This is, this diary entry, we included it because it's a microcosm really, or one example of the use of sexualized torture and this violence during the early days of the Nakba. This one is from 1949, but there's a lot of evidence from the Deir Yassin massacre in 1948. A lot of survivors at the time came out with testimonies about how sexualized violence was being used against them to force them to flee their homes. Specifically, Zionist militias that later were then, instituted and mandated as the IDF. Zionist militias using loudspeakers, driving through villages with threats of rape, screaming threats of rape with these loudspeakers. And so
I thought it was the Arabs. I thought the Arabs were telling people to leave, right?
Yeah,
that's what people said.
And so these accounts, speaking of evidence and what is seen as legitimate evidence, but also what is classified and hidden, this account, these testimonies were unverified. And so the testimonies, these primary memories and testimonies of the sexual assault were unverified until there was there was a seal on a British mandate investigation. And so the British mandate itself was participating in investigating these crimes that were committed against Palestinians, people that they were already colonizing, and then had sealed the evidence proving that these crimes were committed. And that only changed in 1970, at a time where sexual torture and violence had increased in intensity and frequency, specifically in prisons, specifically after the occupation of the West Bank and Jerusalem and Gaza. And so in 1970, it was exposed by these British journalists, and they had revealed or retrieved this investigation and reported on their findings. But this is really important to understand, because there are many instances where you see gaps in testimonies. For example, years where in our chronological timeline, specific years where we don't say that this testimony came out or that testimony came out. The fact that these testimonies don't exist in the public, or imagination or in public consciousness doesn't mean that that this form of sexual torture or sexualized violence didn't happen. And more importantly, it doesn't mean that it slowed down. There was a specific period after the 80s towards the 90s and the early 2000s where you start seeing less incidents of sexualized torture and violence in prisons. There's many reasons. One of them is that there's this sort of relationship between the use of sexualized torture and violence within prisons and the strength of the prisoners movement inside these prisons. But also it's because after worldwide and international condemnation of these tactics and strategies, when people like Rasmiya Aude started going out to the UN testifying to being raped in front of her father, to her father being tortured and forced to have sexual intercourse with her, there were widespread condemnations. What Israel did after that is that it created a legal framework to house sexualized torture and violence, to put it within boundaries that are permissible. And this was, revealed in a report in the early 2000s by Damir, after, I think in 1999, the Israeli Supreme Court had created these boundaries within which the use of sexual torture and violence is reasonable, of course, according to the discretion of those enacting it against Palestinian prisoners. This includes things like torture that doesn't leave physical marks on people. It includes things like psychological torture, inflicting psychological pain through the use of sexualized violence. And so that's just, one thing I wanted to mention about certain periods where you see gaps in testimonies, or perhaps a decrease in the frequency or intensity of sexualized violence. It's not so much that it stopped happening or that it decreased in intensity or frequency all the time. It's more so that it started being allowed within a specific quota. Right. Torture was actually institutionalized and used as a legitimate strategy in interrogations within Israeli law. I mean, of course, we know this doesn't matter whether or not it's instituted in Israeli law to Palestinians. But this is, for our findings, extremely important because it illustrates a methodological utilization of sexualized violence against Palestinians.
And can you talk about the, every accusation is a confession, and how much Palestinians, especially on October 7th, have been accused of rape? How much the media repeated that, how much they covered the rape that had no documentation, and how much they ignored the rape that has been documented?
I mean, yes, of course. It's been, I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, this entire state and its population seem to be in complete agreement that this allegation of systemic mass rape is, a justification for a subsequent genocide of the Palestinian people. And yet, our research on the contrary has documented that this systemic and institutionalized rape and torture is actually used against Palestinians by Israel. And so, of course, on October 7, within a few hours, the first thing we observed was that, these Western depictions of Arabs and Muslims as dangerous, these depraved beings that have savages that have no control over sexual impulses, had unleashed their violence against these innocent Israeli women that were simply living, or going to a rape, going to a and that's,
A rave, I know.
Yeah, a rave. Immediately, these racialized constructions of Palestinian Arab and Muslim men were propagated in the media, were taken as absolute truth, and were laundered, and to this day, Zionists and Zionists are seeking condemnations from anyone and everyone for a hoax, for what is essentially a hoax, when in reality, and everyone gave them these condemnations. Right. When in reality, the international community and all these people that were offering up condemnations of alleged sexualized torture and alleged systemic rape had historically completely ignored all the testimonies from Palestinians alleging and testifying to this sort of violence being inflicted upon them. And so, what we saw immediately was that there was this security threat created against a colonizer that is moral, a colonizer that is, just, or a colonizer that is peaceful and doesn't really have anything to do with the state to which they belong. So, these constructions of Muslim and Palestinian men took off, and these logics were then sort of enshrined as theology, that Palestinians are just existential threats, in order to justify extreme violence, in order to justify genocide in the name of security and defense, and that was part of these mass rape accusations with genocidal intent. And so we say and we assert in this report that these allegations in and of themselves were leveraged with genocidal intent. And this builds on patterns that have been documented, the use of these allegations against people that are, being exploited and oppressed and repressed by imperialist and colonial forces. But essentially what happened was that these volunteers at a Zionist organization, this ultra-Orthodox Israeli search and rescue organization, were first responders to scenes that simply did not exist. They collected testimonies from Israeli women who seemed to not exist. And if they do exist, then they were killed afterwards. And that was taken as complete fact. These media organizations that tout these journalistic standards, that tout adherence to neutrality or whatever, completely ignored all of these criteria that they need to verify this sort of allegation against an entire nation. The allegation that the Palestinian people and Hamas, the political party, members of this party, engaged in systemic rape on October 7. And these, media laundered and propagated this hoax as total truth. But also importantly, NGOs and nonprofits played a really important part in propagating it. They completely disregarded any sort of legal threshold that they use otherwise to verify these allegations. Within a few months, these reports and papers, tens of pages, were coming out from these organizations, including Physicians for Human Rights Israel, which at the same time is trying to stop the genocide in Gaza. They released a paper after 1 month exactly on November 7th that was titled "Sexual and Gender-Based Violence as a Weapon of War." And so, now we were in using the war framework, which completely doesn't work, as I mentioned, for this sort of dynamic. And so, UN Women immediately invited Israeli women to talk about the systemic mass rape that allegedly happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Keep going. No.
The last thing I want to mention is the absolute disaster of an article, which is Screams Without Words.
Yeah.
Screams Without Words shared this harrowing story, allegedly, of this Israeli woman that was raped, later killed, and her own family came out and was like,
we don't think she was raped.
We didn't agree for you to publish this. This didn't actually happen.
And you misrepresented what you were doing and saying.
Yeah, exactly.
They said that about the journalist.
And then the New York Times releases an article by Nick Kristof about sexual violence that is committed against Palestinians, and it's in the opinion section.
Right. It's an op-ed, not a reported article. Right.
This is an op-ed. Yeah.
And of course, it's so important to remember that, much like the genocide claim, this has been said countless times by countless Palestinians that it's genocide, and countless times that there's rape. And I think it's obviously significant, though. I mean, and people get very frustrated. They're like, oh, now that Nicholas Kristof says it, now people pay attention. But of course, we know that we live in a world where that happens, right? Like, it's lamentable, but it's obviously going to have a different impact. And likewise, I mean, it is very hard to argue with a Ben Gurion diary entry. So again, it's not that we don't believe the countless men and women who report share having been raped. And of course, there's so many more who won't because of obvious issues of stigma. It's not that, but for the Ben Gurion thing, we wouldn't believe it. It just happens to be a particularly damning piece of evidence for people who are not disposed to believe it. And I just want to play, we've played this many times, but I do want to play this really disgusting Dana Bash clip that comes from December of 2023. I believe. So it was right after, months after. And at this point, there hadn't even been that many reports on the alleged mass rape hoax. And yet you'll see that she is adamant that Pramila Jayapal condemned something that hadn't even been reported on. One thing I actually want to say about the Doctors for Doctors for Human Rights is that one thing that they did say, at least early on, and I'm not crediting them, I just remember this stood out, is that they were like, no, it wasn't, because there was a rumor that it was like there were orders, right? They were like, yeah, there were some rapes, but it wasn't necessarily given upon orders. And even they said, well, no, like the only evidence that there were orders to do that came from people who were tortured, and that's not reliable. So anyway, but let's go to this. Speaking of torture, sorry to subject everyone to this exchange between Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal and Dana Bash.
I want to ask you about sexual violence, and it's kind of remarkable that this issue hasn't gotten enough attention globally. Widespread use of rape, brutal rape, sexual violence against Israeli women by Hamas. I've seen a lot of progressive women, generally speaking, they're quick to defend women's rights and speak out against using rape as a weapon of war, but downright silent on what we saw on October 7th and what might be happening inside Gaza right now to these hostages. Why is that?
I mean, I don't know that that's true. I think we always talk about the impact of war on women in particular. In fact, I remember 20 years ago, I did a petition around the war in Iraq.
Have you talked about it since October 7th?
And I've condemned what Hamas has done. I've condemned
specifically
all of
women?
the actions. Absolutely. The rape, of course. But I think we have to remember that Israel is a democracy. That is why they are a strong ally of ours. And if they do not comply with international humanitarian law, they are bringing themselves to a place that makes it much more difficult strategically for them to be able to build the kinds of allies to keep public opinion with them. And frankly, Morally, I think we cannot say that one war crime deserves another. That is not what international humanitarian law says.
Okay, with respect, I was just asking about the women, and you turned it back to Israel. I'm asking you about Hamas. In fact,
I already answered your question, Dana. I said it's horrific, and I think that rape is horrific, sexual assault is horrific. I think that it happens in war situations. Terrorist organizations like Hamas obviously are using these as tools. However, I think we have to be balanced about bringing in the outrages against Palestinians. 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping.
Well, Dana, I
Palestinian
think
women.
we're not.
Okay, so I mean that line there is like it's actually useful almost because Dana Bash is demonstrating in real time what atrocity propaganda is, and I want you to respond to this, but that line at the end is just so such a tell. I mean, it's so revealing and incriminating because she says, and it's terrible, referring to the killings of civilians, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian women. And the reason that's so powerful is because it's exactly doing what atrocity propaganda does, which is like, well, it's terrible, but there's like a characteristic. It's like there are different types of people, right? So like the Palestinians are rapists and the Israelis aren't. So while it's unfortunate that there are all these civilians killed, it kind of has to happen because we're dealing with monsters.
Yeah. I mean, I don't follow this woman's journalistic career, but I would love to know what she said after the videos leaked from
Nothing.
Amman,
That's
where
the thing.
we literally, we saw
Nothing.
Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian men. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's like the layers and levels. So one is that she and Jake Tapper, who are major Zionist mouthpieces, and she's interviewed Netanyahu very respectfully. She and Jake Tapper both put forward the mass rape hoax. Jake Tapper interviewed the people who were later discredited. And we're not talking about women who said that they were raped. We're talking about alleged witnesses who then had to admit that they didn't see what they said they saw, or other people debunked it. Not only did they never correct the record or acknowledge that the things that they said happened, or the people that they put on their show and said happened, they never acknowledged that those things were disproven. They also never acknowledged the State Haman stuff. And that, to me, it's like, my expectations are so low. I never thought that they would retract their lies, but I thought that maybe just so they wouldn't look like the absolute racist ghouls that they are, that maybe to cover their asses and pretend to be journalists, they would say, and this is also bad, even if they pretended that both sides had done it, right? I kind of thought maybe they would say, and this is of course awful, and it's a few bad apples, right, or whatever. But the impunity in which they operate allowed them to not even mention it, not even pay lip service to it, which is just so incredibly infuriating. But please, what are your thoughts on this sense of impunity and how it enables? I mean, I would say it actually enables and empowers this kind of ongoing abuse.
Yeah, I mean, well, it does enable, it does empower it. It incites actually rape, as it incites the use of rape against Palestinians as not only a legitimate strategy, but also a desired strategy to be used against Palestinian prisoners, but Palestinians in general. I mean, I think we've witnessed really one of the most incredible, in the worst way possible, journalistic arcs over the past 3 years. First, within a few hours, allegations of mass systemic rape, and I don't know what definition of systemic or mass they're using, but within a few hours, it was being reported as absolute truth. And then a few hours later, or a couple of days later, it was revealed that the main person sharing these allegations of systemic rape was in the IDF. And then a few hours later, you start seeing allegations even by people that, like this woman that was being interviewed, by people who want to do the both sides things,
Right.
you know, like it's so like, yes, I've condemned,
Pramila,
and
yeah,
I've
Pramila
condemned,
Jayapal, yes,
and
exactly, right.
I've bent over backwards, and I've condemned, and you're still being, you know, attacked on national TV by Zionist mouthpieces. Even those people were fabricating allegations of their own. They were saying, you know, it's really awful that we're seeing, you know, people doubting the October 7 mass rape allegations. Have you considered that these women were killed after they had been raped? Have you considered that these women are too scared to share their testimonies of being raped, and that's why they're not coming out on national TV? And yet, less than a year later, they're featuring these rapists from prisons on TV. They're parading them around like national heroes. They are, you know, they're not protesting because they're not against it. They're rallying in support of the use of rape.
They're protesting against the attempts to hold them accountable.
To hold them accountable.
Right. That's
which the attempt to hold them accountable in and of itself was really just, you know, an optics situation because the video was leaked. But the reality is, this guy, the men, the soldiers that perpetrated that rape are just fine. They're living their lives, if not committing more and enacting more sexualized torture and rape against Palestinian prisoners.
Right. And the sick thing is that the only reason that there was like any debate over whether or not to detain or investigate the rapes was because it was a way for Israel. The debate wasn't like, should these people be punished for moral reasons? It was like, if the world sees that we are not prosecuting war crimes, then the ICC will have jurisdiction. Like, that was the only reason that anyone was considering it as a viable option. It wasn't like, oh, because rape is bad.
Yeah.
It's like, we can't give the ICC the excuse to have jurisdiction here. This is a really disturbing thing to talk about, but I think it's important, and you talk about it in your report, which is the use of dogs in sexualized violence. So can you talk about what you found here?
Yeah, I mean, we have an entire section that is dedicated to sexual torture and rape with dogs. You know, it was one of it, and it still is one of the most difficult things to try to understand and comprehend, because we've been socialized to see dogs as pets. They are pets, and they are loving animals.
Man's best friend,
souls,
right?
Man's best friend. They are souls that, you know, accompany us in our daily lives. And the idea of someone so depraved to train a dog to rape a human being, I think is incomprehensible or unconscionable to anyone who is normal. Right. Really, anyone who's a normal human being, who's not depraved and not someone that enjoys torture and rape as a hobby and as a job within the Israeli state, and so there was clear, you know, we've documented this violence in the report with several testimonies, and we found that there was clear intent to sexually humiliate and torture Palestinians during arrests, before being taken to prisons, during interrogations, but also during imprisonment, using dogs. And so there was a systemic character to the use of dogs to commit sexualized violence. But I think also what's really important is dogs are also used by the Israeli army, by Israeli forces to kill Palestinians. There are many stories from Gaza about Palestinians being mauled by Israeli trained dogs, to be left, and their families finding them weeks and months later, specifically after families were allowed to return to the north, finding the decomposed the decomposed remains of their loved ones that had been killed by dogs trained by Israel. And so what we find is that there's there's early evidence of dogs being used as used to rape prisoners, but the highest frequency of the use of dogs was during the past 3 years. There are countless testimonies, even more coming out. There were more testimonies that came out a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago from released prisoners and detainees, specifically after the prison exchanges that happened over the past 3 years, of prisoners being blindfolded, stripped naked, and then trained dogs being let loose on them while they are blindfolded, subjecting them to rape. And also forcing other prisoners to witness that. There was also this is from a Euromed human rights report. There were also testimonies from the PCHR's Torture and Genocide report, which was very widely circulated. Again, this one is, prisoners that were stripped naked and then forced to watch each other being sexually tortured and raped by an Israeli trained dog. Also watching, each other, of course, screaming from the pain, knowing that that they are next, that the dog will later be let loose on them. There's another testimony about from a prisoner who part of his testimony was about how this dog knew what it was doing. It was very deliberate in its actions and very well trained in this, in rape. He says that the dog did it deliberately, knowing exactly what it was doing, and it inserted its penis into my anus while the soldiers kept beating and torturing us and spraying pepper spray in our faces. There are countless more testimonies, I think, of course, extremely disturbing, but listening to them, researching them, writing them down, understanding them is nothing. I mean, the disgust and pain and confusion, I guess, because it's so difficult to understand, that we feel is nothing compared to being subjected to this. And so, I urge people to read the report, even though, of course, it's extremely disturbing, but also because it's extremely disturbing.
Right. Yeah, and it's a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, this is such a lie. This is blood libel because dogs can't physically do that." It's like, well, what's ironically is that, like, I mean, there are claims that this happened to Jews during the Holocaust. There's like at least one documentation of this. So people saying that are Holocaust deniers, which, I mean, they're fine being Holocaust deniers when it comes to this Holocaust, right? But there's also a woman who was famous in under Pinochet for using a dog to rape prisoners. So, I mean, it's disgusting that we even have to bring this up, whether or not this is possible. I mean, it's a really disgusting thing that we live in a world where we have to make the point that it is possible for dogs to rape human beings.
And it's, I think, the jokes that are made by these Israeli comedians, or I don't know, content creators, whatever they are, about
there was a real stand-up guy, like a guy performing stand-up,
about how these allegations are so absurd that they must be fake. I think shows the extent of the dehumanization of the Palestinian people for Zionists. And yet, at the same time, allegations of mass rape on October 7, systemic mass rape, premeditated mass rape, are supposed to be believed without question, without doubt, without any evidence. And when there is evidence, if it's unreliable, if it's later debunked, you're still supposed to believe it. And I think, this is just clearly the extent to which Palestinians are dehumanized by Zionism and the sponsors of Zionism.
Right.
And also why it's so important to speak about this, of course, to document it, to share it, to provide this analysis that is included in this report, in order to make it. And I think I said this before last time I was on the show, to make it as difficult as possible for Zionists and Israelis to exist in society. We need to ostracize, marginalize, and isolate Zionism as a political ideology and Zionists from any sort of respectable, civilized society that does not condone or enjoy sexual torture and rape as part of its cultural heritage, and that is, one of our tasks as people that are involved in the movement, as solid people that are in solidarity with the Palestinians, to make it impossible and just untenable for someone to proudly exist as a Zionist within us, to walk, between us. Like I think I saw the other day or today, the Hind Rajab Foundation identified an Israeli occupation forces soldier at Tomorrowland at a festival, dancing, living his life, and later found evidence of photographic footage and photographic evidence of this person committing war crimes, and had taken that to court. It is our responsibility to make it completely untenable for Zionism to exist among us.
As like an acceptable ideology.
As an acceptable ideology and an acceptable way to live life, and to continue to justify and perpetrate the genocide of the Palestinian people and its expansion into the rest of the Arab world, its expansion into Lebanon, the attack on the continuous assault on Iran. It's our responsibility to isolate Zionism.
And by the way, we will be having on a lawyer with the Hind Rajab Foundation soon, Jake Ram, who's done amazing work. This is awful and important, and it's so important partly because it's so awful. Like, we have to make sure people know about this, and because we have such a genocidal media. I mean, the media is just absolutely complicit in this, right? And it, without their complicity, this wouldn't be allowed to happen, because people face no. Obviously, I mean, international law has failed, diplomacy has failed, all that, but less, I think, obviously, the media has enabled this to happen. Tell us quickly where people can find this report, also what the Palestinian Collective, Feminist Collective is, and where people can find out more about that organization.
Yeah, so the report is available for download on predatorystate.org. You can keep up with our posts, updates about it on Palestinian Feminist Collective on Instagram, or on the Palestinian Feminist Collective.org website, where you can follow our organization. We're an anti-imperialist feminist collective of Palestinian and Arab members. We organize for Palestinian liberation here in North America on Turtle Island, recognizing that Zionist settler colonialism and imperialism are the primary contradictions, but also using using gender and sexuality as an entry point to understanding imperialism and settler colonialism. Of course, we provide a lot of analysis in this report about colonial feminism, about the ways it's been weaponized against our people to justify exactly what we're witnessing. Right. On one end, asking for condemnations every single minute of the day of alleged rape, and on the other hand, enacting it against an entire nation with genocidal intent.
Yeah, it's almost like it just doesn't matter if it's Palestinians who are getting raped.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't count for these people. I just want to read a comment for you, which is, Tara, God bless you and your work. Thank you, John Balaya, for that comment. And I want to also acknowledge you guys, Progressive International, for supporting this, and literally the handful, I mean, I think you can count on one hand of the places that really reported on this: Electronic Intifada, Mondo Weiss, and The Gray Zone. Those were the places that, before other more mainstream ones did, we're pushing back on the mass rape claim.
Mm-hmm. And these reports and investigations are cited frequently in our report. Yeah.
So, and that's, I should clarify, Western media. Yeah. Thank you. Anything else you want to say before you leave us for tonight? And of course, we'd love to have you back on.
Thank you for having me. I think I would just, again, encourage people to engage with the content of this report. I understand completely as one of the people that worked on it, how disturbing it is, how, incomprehensible, again, to anyone who is remotely normal,
right.
The extent and severity of violence, the way that it's, you can see the pattern and the methodology behind it. But I encourage you and urge you to read it, engage with it, specifically because it's so disturbing, specifically because this is a pattern that is happening right in front of our eyes, and it's our responsibility to use this evidence to enact as much pressure on for sanctions, for divestment, for mobilization, for a people's arms embargo, for to destroy AIPAC and the Zionist lobby, and to grow our movement.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much. And and before people say, "Oh, it's anti-Semitic," to say we need to make Zionism unacceptable. There are more Christian Zionists than Jewish Zionists, so this is a obviously it's linked. I mean, Israel is a Jewish state, but Zionism, the first political Zionists were Christians. I'm not saying this at all to exonerate Zionist Jews, because Zionist Jews don't get a pass. I'm just saying that, luckily for the world, unluckily for the world, Zionists don't have to be Jewish. So for people who are accusing Tara or me of, anti-Semitism, I mean, it's almost not worth even responding to. But I do think it is important. Actually, I do think it's important to remember that Zionism is a project that unites various faiths and backgrounds, which is very disturbing. It's something we have to talk about, and of course has everything to do with imperialism and colonialism, as you guys document so well. Well, thank you so much, Tara, and we will link to this report.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great. And I saw you did a great presentation at the People's Forum. Have you guys been invited onto more media?
Yeah, we have. I mean, thankfully, alternative and leftist media have been gracious in inviting us. The launch event from the People's Forum is on YouTube also.
Yeah.
We also, one of the panelists that attended is Hadil Shatara. She's a freed political prisoner. She says her own testimony. Extremely powerful testimony, and I would urge people to watch this too. It's on YouTube.
Great, and I would love to be connected to her, because I would love to have her on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and of course, full disclosure, my co-host of Useful Idiots, Aaron Mate, was there.
And Aaron Mate was there, and I was there.
Yeah, and you were there, and it was excellent. So, and we can link to that also. We'll have thank you again, Tara, and have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Okay, so that was excellent. That was disturbing. That was so important. And their report is the result of a lot of hard work. And as Tara said, we have to, it's painful, as it should be, and it's excruciating to read, because if you didn't, if you're a human being, you're not going to enjoy it. But it is also really important to read. And it's actually the history is, it has fascinating history. I mean, it's history of evil. But it's incredible to see what these people documented. I mean, the people who did it, they didn't hide it. They didn't publish it, but they were writing about it in their diaries or writing about it to their superiors. I think that Brad, I have to ask your advice about this. Obviously, we're not going to paywall any of this. I mean, that goes without saying. But Brad, can you join? I have to ask you something. Do you think we need to take part of this? I'm worried that because of the content and we don't beep things out, that we should maybe immediately cut this and upload just that part of it so that it doesn't like kind of get the rest of it suppressed, and then we can eventually make a version that has beeps so it gets, does that make sense? So the Kshama stuff doesn't get suppressed, and we can put this up right away in another YouTube that won't have beeps, but the suppression won't affect the Kshama thing. And then if after that we can do a beep version, so that'll get even less suppressed.
Well, my knee jerk, I think that as long as we don't, I don't know, it's inside baseball for folks, but you know, when you do this sort of thing on YouTube, you have to kind of check a lot of boxes, and you have to say like, is this suitable for kids and things like that. And I think that as long as we do that honestly and appropriately, but then that being said, kind of like the other week where we played your very nice video, but it had some stuff that threw up some flags, and we're like, oh, now we got to take that out. I think that if we found that were to be happening, then yeah, we could quickly and easily do what you were describing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you are watching this and it cuts out kind of in a jarring way, hey guys, if you're watching this, the following may apply. So to see the rest of this, we are not paywalling it, obviously, but we are going to put it up elsewhere so the whole thing doesn't get demonetized. And not demonetized, I don't care about that, suppressed. We will put the link in the description. Now, that may or may not be applicable. So this is kind of like, I feel like we're in Back to the Future or something like that.
Right. Hello, future people.
Exactly, yeah. Like if you're watching this, that means they've whatever.
I feel like we need
Earth.
to like spin a top and wait to see if it topples over.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Anyway, I mean, that was just very important, and I'm very grateful to Tara for that. And I do feel like it's kind of the least we can do is read about it, and you know, take that in, because again, it pales in comparison to what the people have experienced. And it is, wow. Okay. Well, we will be doing a stream on Friday with Ro Khanna, as well as with Kamal Moussalet, Kamel Moussalet, whose son was 20 years old, safe when he was killed by Israeli settlers while visiting Palestine from Florida. He's a Palestinian American. That doesn't matter, as we've covered before. And we actually have interviewed another relative of Saif's, because Saif is the cousin of Muhammad, and we interviewed his uncle. Muhammad was tortured and imprisoned, but was not killed. Okay, so anything else that we have to say, Brad? Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. Again, liking is not for validation. We will not be paywalling any of this, but please do. We encourage you to support the show by becoming Patreon supporters at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show, or by becoming YouTube members. And thank you. Yes, we have 2 new members, right? So
I think that
one new member, but it comes up twice. I'm not sure why, but we love to see it. Yeah, you count as 2 to us. So thank you, Miley. Then we have some nice super chats. Love to Kshama Sawant. This lady is a fighter. Thank you for having Kshama on, Katie. Free Palestine, free Lebanon.
It sucks that we continue to have to add countries.
I know. Yeah. Iran. Katie, thanks for having Kshama Sawant on. She's the real deal, and we Seattleites needed this. Yeah. Then we have a super chat. Thank you. A super sticker from a name I can't read. SAR. SAR is the oh my god, it's the currency. Yeah.
I would have been really impressed if you
could read
the name.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's our own fault. That's not this person's fault.
Yeah, of course. Then a super sticker from Tirana Hamdi. Thank you for that. And then Tara, God bless you and your work. And let's read the recent Patreon subscribers that we have since last stream. Okay, Let's see. When was our last stream, Brad? What was the date?
Ooh, that would have been, and I need to just have this in my head before
I
we
know.
even begin.
It's my fault. Yeah.
The first 20th, the 17th.
Okay. So since then we have, thank you so much. Let's see, where are we? Okay. Thank you so much. The 17th, you said?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So let's see. Thank you so much, Roberto. Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you so much. 1 second, sorry about that. Usually it shows me their name. Oh, I know why. Let me do this. Okay. I got it now. Okay. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Danny. And that's all we have to say for right now. And again, we will be here. We will be here on Friday with Rokana and Kamel. And again, thank you for tuning in.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing.
Antifa!